Welcome to another episode of the Lightspeed Investing Podcast. I'm so glad to have Shannon back here again with us to talk about some very innovative things that she's doing and thus able to offer to a lot of business professionals from her years of experience in corporate finance, right, as an attorney. So super happy to have you back, Shannon. I know it's summertime, so people are doing lots of traveling. Where are you currently at?
So I'm in New York right now, but I've been traveling back and forth mostly through the United States, whether it's to Chicago. Looks like I'll be going to Rhode Island soon, Connecticut, a few places, DC. So hopping around.
No, for sure, for sure. Same as well. I'll be going to Michigan, Beverly Hills again, as well as Virginia this summer. Is what I have slated. So, super excited to connect with you though, because I know you've been building a lot of things on the back end, and I love to share with the audience listening in, right, what you're doing that will allow people to get access to a very high level, I would say, uh, understanding, knowledge, right? In which they normally would not have access to. So you want to kind of break that down, the industry that you are in and what you're able to do, right, to give people that unprecedented privilege.
Oh, I'd love to. And yes, thank you so much for having me again. And I want people to know, like, many times people are taught what to do in finances, and it's a very limited view. They're not taught in a way that really shows what they're doing and why. However, when you look at wealthy people who make, let's say they have $50 million of net worth and more, they get a different level of advisory services. They have a suite or team of advisors who are paid quite a bit of money. I've been one of them, lawyers, CPAs, bankers, investment advisors, etc., or financial advisors. They have all these people who are in rooms essentially advocating on their behalf. And one of the things that I realize and have learned about generational wealth when you look at single family offices where it's a billionaire family or a 500 million plus family where they keep the wealth multiple generations, they're not just talking about money in the way that everyday people talk about it. And when you look at wealth advisory services, so typically when you think of the investment banks and the wealth advisory services, private banks, you have a private banker or a wealth advisor working with the family, translating into English for the most part what their professional, the CPA, the attorneys are actually doing and helping them implement. Everyday people don't get this. And and they can't afford it, right? Realistically. But they also don't even know it. And it's like my perspective is there are things that they can be taught to do at a very basic level that actually move the needle for them and allow them to know enough to become a full stack owner of their lives. They have agency. Whereas they can navigate who they're working with. The financial advisors for most everyday people, their job is to sell them insurance. That's not always a bad thing, but people don't even know what type of insurance they need. They don't understand the terms. Oftentimes, they can be put in situations that don't work with their long term interests. They don't know why they're actually getting the tools that they only understand it from, well, my financial advisor sold me this. It provides insurance. Yes. But what insurance for what? And my thought is that level of advice, people need access to it. They need to know why they're doing what they're doing. And there's tax advisors. Lord knows there's a lot of tax advice on the internet, some of which is accurate and some of which is not. People don't know, you don't need every tactic that a wealthy person can use. If you technically went to infinity to just save taxes all the time, you actually give up certain things when it comes to your lifestyle. So it's not always a good thing to just chase tax savings, but it's a
Mhm.
good thing to balance tax savings and do it
Sure.
the right way. And then people don't understand the risks. They don't know the environment that they're actually operating in. They have no sense of civics or governance and ultimately how that impacts their lives. For example, with estate planning, every family needs estate planning. The American dream, you buy a house, you have an asset. you need estate planning. And the government's form of taxation for estate planning for regular individuals, no, they don't have the estate tax, but it's probate fees. They literally, when they pass their property, all of their belongings go into a probate court, and their family may not be able to access the things for sometimes years. And that time, and then they have to pay fees, pay attorneys' fees, court costs, and everything else for that process because people haven't actually taken care of things. So that my thought is if people know at a baseline level what they need to do and why, they can at least get the bare minimum done and then build from there. And if you build it the right way, it's not something that you have to take apart and rebuild. It's something that you just add on to and you put the building blocks together. And I would say high earning, my target audience, the people who I typically work with are high earners, but it's not something that everyday people, whether they're middle class, lower middle class, can't use. They certainly can. It's the same building blocks no matter what. But I typically work with people who are in the high earner category because they are one or two tweaks away from getting this.
But the thing is, right, for them, if they were to go the traditional route, right, what does that look like? And that's kind of the shortcut, the efficient shortcut that you're able to offer, right?
Correct. When they go the traditional route, it's very expensive. And most times they're like, I can't afford it. Um, for, advisory services, they would have a financial advisor, they would have a attorney, they would or maybe several attorneys, they would have a CPA. And ultimately, they're going to work with all these professionals, but none of the professionals work together and no one speaks the same language about, okay, so I'm doing this in one category. Say I'm starting a business. How does starting a business impact my estate planning? How does this impact any potential? Are there any threats to my livelihood, my house, the things that I actually have in my name because I'm doing this activity? A lot of those people don't provide guidance on that. They'll just say, they'll address one piece.
So that's actually why, I mean, it sounds to me like the traditional route, a good solution to that is why people have family offices, right? Because underneath that family office concept, that's where you have everything in-house and everyone is on the same page. So
Right.
I'm guessing, right, from your standpoint, are you able to offer these people the equivalent of a family office service, except it's more personalized, except it's, I'm kind of curious where that intersects.
So I'm doing more advisory work.
Mhm,
So if they're curating their quote family office for themselves, they can curate it at their budget level because
mhm,
they may not be able to bring everything in-house.
mhm.
So they can at least have somebody who, for example, if they work with me, who can actually coach them on the big picture of these things and think through, okay, when you're thinking of an entity structure, when I deal with businesses, I'm not just thinking of, okay, you will have an ownership structure where if you're a doctor and you want to make sure that your medical malpractice is covering you and that you're actually operating within a professional company while you're actually practicing. But then you also want to use the money that you earn from work to buy assets and grow that. Well, you want to do that in a way where that's protected. And so I'm thinking through the life circumstances. I actually know two people, like I have clients who they were two people and they're both doctors, right? And because of the liability, they were technically afraid to get married. So the thought of, if someone sues him, that could actually impact their finances
Mhm.
on both sides versus the opposite happening where someone sues her, that can impact their finances. They figured if they keep everything separate, they don't have to get married. Well, by putting in this structure, let's think through the life circumstance. I was actually able to set them up where now it's their decision whether or not they get married. It's not a risk calculation. So I think through the life goals that someone has, and I
Mhm.
provide an advisory service, and I have a coaching program where I actually walk people through the system. I kind of call it like a little IKEA of wealth, where you have
Ah,
you can actually see what it is, how it works when if you're unfamiliar with it, or you've only seen it from a certain vantage point, then you can actually understand the workings and then decide what works for you. Put
Gotcha.
those first pieces in play. And as you
Okay.
put those pieces in play, then you can actually start doing more. I would never tell somebody to do it all at once. I'll tell them,
Mhm.
pick a few things,
Okay.
1 to 3 things. Let's implement those. And then pick up another few things.
So that's a great, I would say, segue to if you had to identify three critical building blocks, right? What are the three things that you would share with the audience, right? That you to pay attention to, or that you would help walk them through?
Yes, so I organize it really into 3 phases,
Mhm.
and the 3 phases are organized based off of really mindset mastery because I tell people all the time, I've worked in restructuring. I've literally taken a whole wealth system apart. I've literally seen $660 million worth of net worth go down to dust very quickly, and that's just because there's no actual number that is generational wealth. It's a set of practices. It's a thought process, it's a set of behaviors. And you have to be oriented the correct way because wealth is just an engine. It will take you wherever you're going faster. So, and sometimes more explosively.
Mhm.
So ultimately, we want to put the engine behind something that's driving in the right direction. And that's that mindset mastery. Now, there's a certain part that gets the engine going, and that is the cash flowing and tax strategies. So I teach the second component being strategies. And the strategies ultimately feeds the mindset feeds that because I run people through an exercise called I call it the personal balance sheet. It's something I learned from a mentor of mine where he talked about how the balance sheet, when you think of assets equals liabilities plus equity, meaning
Mhm.
you always to acquire an asset, there's a cost. Now the question is whether it's working for you or against you.
Mhm.
This happens both on the financial side when we look at accounting, which is a whole convention in and of itself, but it also happens on the personal side. We all have talents, gifts, things that we
Mhm.
do, components of ourselves. We sometimes need to see them differently.
Mm.
And those are things that actually have the
Right.
capacity to drive well for us.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So that's why we start with the mindset first and we feed
Mhm.
there because you got to tap into you. Typically, you invest in what
Okay.
you know.
Right.
And the more you know, the more you can invest in.
Correct.
And so you have to find those things and understand what are the tax havens and shelters and everything. How do you make the money move?
Right.
Then once you know how to make the money move, that's when we use tax strategy. We optimize it. Contrary to a lot of the internet posts where everything's tax strategy for Augusta rule, and I love a good Augusta rules tax strategy where someone can rent their own home to their business for 14 days or less and get that income tax free. But it has to be done with the right procedures in place, but also done to support the actual economics of what you're doing. The tax always follows the economics. So I always start people with economic stuff first, and then you use the tax to optimize it. And once you get there, the next part in phase 3, we talk about de-risking. And there's always a personal component to de-risking because we're humans. We make human
Yeah.
errors.
So Shannon, wait. So phase one is building blocks with the mindset.
Yes,
Phase two
strategies.
is your strategies, and
Yes.
is that when you identify not just the assets and liabilities on paper, but that's the strategies that caters to that person's strength that we talked about just now?
Yes.
Okay,
It-
gotcha. Okay, so phase two is the strategy that's more so personalized to the right inputs, right? Because the right inputs generates the right outputs, and then phase three is
Then we de-risk.
gotcha.
And because ultimately you have the first 2 phases are the things that allow you to build wealth.
Hmm.
But there's always a wealth erosion process. So the de-risking slows that process down.
Why is there always a wealth erosion process? I don't like that. Why can't there just be a wealth growth process and
Think about if you work out and you
uh
work out too much,
okay,
your muscles start tearing if you don't give them rest. They if you ultimately start to face injuries,
okay,
right? So wealth is very similar. And if someone's never worked out because they didn't have to, if someone has, for example, their family built a business for them and they reap the benefits, so someone's providing them everything they need, they don't flex the muscles,
Hmm.
the investment muscles necessarily. They rely on what's been done. And it's kind of like I do aerial acrobatic exercises now. I discovered quite a few muscles
Hmm.
that I was not aware of.
Mm.
That like I used to do salsa, I did kickboxing. I've done a lot of different workouts in my life.
Uh-huh.
But when I started doing aerial acrobatics, I've discovered muscles that I
Yeah.
don't use on a regular basis.
Right.
Well, it's very similar with wealth. You have
Gotcha.
a situation where if you don't have to use the muscles, even if you're working them in certain ways, you get used to how they're working. The problem is some of the support muscles, you're not training those. And because they don't need to be trained necessarily until you try and do something else or the
Mm.
environment changes. And when the environment changes, let's just say, okay, you overwork a muscle because that's all that's being used, it tears. And similar things happen with wealth. So there's always an erosion process that is
Mm.
going on. So the goal is to build faster than it erodes. If you build faster and better than it can erode, much like you see irrigation processes where they rotate crops. If they keep putting the crop in the exact same place, eventually one day the field says, "We're done. I'm tired."
So it sounds to me like the people that you work with, it's not just purely about tangibles. Like they also have to have an inherent growth mindset because you're going to challenge them to develop themselves, quite frankly, right? Because if you're looking at strategies, right, in phase two, that's not just like pure tactical strategies, but things that also applies to the person. Then it may be like, hey, you may want to look at making sure you don't fall behind on certain sets of knowledge and execution, right? That will put you in the best position to succeed.
Right. So someone could technically get all the math right. And I tell people wealth is a system where
Mm.
it's more principles. It's principles plus systems. So
Yes.
mathematical,
Yeah.
scientific systems, the laws of physics apply
Yeah.
to money. And you can get all that right. But the same laws of physics allowed us to create a nuclear bomb. And
Hmm.
that same nuclear bomb had destructive capabilities on the
Hmm.
planet.
Hmm.
But nuclear energy has both a destructive component, but a constructive component. It can
Correct.
be used in very good ways.
Hmm.
And so wealth is the same. If you get just the math right, you might get something very powerful out of it. The question
Hmm.
is, what does it do and how long does it last? And so the thing about wealth is no matter what, we have enough data to know when you look at the second generation, typically of the people who built wealth in the first generation, 70% is gone. By the third generation, 90% is gone. But there is this
Right.
10% that's pretty good at keeping it. And
So can you name the situations that people, are when people find themselves in certain situations, like what are those that you can identify that it's like, yeah, if you're experiencing those right now or you having these thoughts, uh, it would be very beneficial for you to consider a conversation with me. Like what are those daily occurrences, right?
yeah,
That
it's
they seem to be running into.
yeah, so it's that person who they're the first in their family, typically in certain spaces, whether it's an entrepreneur or a professional, and they're looking around and they're like, okay, all these other entrepreneurs seem to be doing better financially. Like, why are they able to do certain things? I have this huge tax bill. I'm surprised by it.
Mm.
Um, for professionals, they run into the same thing. They make so much on paper, and then they find out they have a tax bracket and a lot of taxes to pay. They do find themselves with that type of problem. They're also trying to figure out holistically, they're looking at their families and they want to build for in a way where they take the people who are helping them and who they want to help as much as possible, where it's reciprocal with them. Now, there's always sometimes where you want to help someone and they cannot help themselves. And it's like, okay, you have to know that and be able to identify, okay, I can't help that person, or I can only help them in limited ways until I get the resources where things can stabilize and it's not peeling off money to help them or whatever I need to do to help them isn't taking away from what I'm overall building.
Mm,
It's just I can only, you know, be a stopgap or but I cannot plug the pot for them,
got
right? It's like I can just provide some drips as I'm able. But having that, those are the problems that they're typically facing. They're looking at this and they're saying, "Whoa, how do I navigate this?" Or one of my clients, they came to me because they had been working with a financial advisor for 4 years, but they learned more from working with me in 40 minutes
you.
because they're like, why am I not seeing progress? I'm paying for all the things that everyone says I should have,
Gotcha,
and it's
gotcha.
not moving the needle.
Yeah, I see.
So those are the frustrations that they're typically experiencing.
I see. So do you see yourself as offering more around? I know you provide advisory services, but is it protection? Is it growth? Is it all of the above? I'm just like, where do you hang your hat on? Because I also hear taxes a lot. So,
Well, taxes is a strategy.
uh-huh.
It's because if you overpay taxes, you can't put money into the right places enough to grow fast
I
enough.
see. Okay.
So I don't care about taxes in the sense of, some people are like, oh, the goal is to pay zero taxes. Yes, I can do it legally for somebody if they have the right inputs for a couple of years, but that may not be a good long-term strategy
Hmm.
for them. And so saving on taxes is a benefit, but it doesn't matter if you save on taxes and you don't know where to put the money.
Okay,
If
gotcha.
you put it in the wrong places, it'll end up right back where it started at
So
some
you offer like the holistic approach for the purpose of essentially helping them preserve their wealth, for helping them create
a
even
legacy.
generational wealth. Is that right? And also have better leadership, like financial leadership.
I
On
think, yeah, the financial leadership and the holistic
yeah,
legacy, because
awesome.
ultimately you don't need to. I'm happy if people become a billionaire, but I think of it more holistically because at the end of the day, you can index so high on billionaire and the career growth that you miss other aspects of life that would be fulfilling.
Hmm.
And a lonely billionaire is still lonely.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, that there's no amount of money that can fill that gap. They can't buy enough people to do it
Hmm.
and they're still a billionaire. And that, for most people, that's enough money to buy the world. But you can't fill that gap. But you can if you have your full self and you value yourself and you build out relationships that are meaningful and you have a certain level of wealth where you're not worried about tomorrow
Hmm.
and you know the skill sets that, oh, well, when this happens and things go wrong, and Lord knows in my own journey I've experienced things going wrong, you can you have the strength to navigate it and navigate through it. You may need time, but you know how to reset and you know what you're aiming for.
Hmm.
So some people will build large nest eggs. Some people will build moderate nest eggs, but they'll have a nest egg.
Gotcha. Okay, well, thank you so much, Shannon. This has been very enlightening and thoughtful and knowledgeable. For you, to the listeners, what would you say is the best way for them to learn more, right? Get a hold of you and take that next step.
So the best way to learn more is to go to my website, www.shannonterale.com, or you can look at the QR code in the background and scan that. It'll take you directly to my website. You can sign up for my newsletter. You'll get a mindful money attorney workbook for signing up. And you can also book time on my calendar as well, or sign up for one of the programs. Some of them you'll have to schedule a conversation, but others you can book directly through the actual website themselves. Typically work with um, like multifamily offices and provide advisory services to them for their clients as well as individuals. So I like I like working with both.
Awesome. Love it. ShannonTurrell.com is the website. Feel free to reference that QR code. And Shannon, again, thank you so much for showing up here today. It was always a pleasure, and I look forward to catching up with you later this summer. Okay?
Looking forward to it as well. Take care.
Alrighty. Thank you so much. You as well. Bye bye.
Bye.